5 new bed towers. We're going to be talking about 5 new bed towers today, and we might as well get going. The first one up is the BIDMC tower, and David Flanagan from BIDMC, who's the VP of Capital Facilities, and Susan Blomquist from Payette, the architect, are going to discuss that project.
So let me just.
I guess I'll start. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. I think it's good to set context where we were in our design process when the pandemic actually got to us here in Boston. So we were really at the place of breaking ground when the pandemic, we crossed over into March of 2020. So a lot of the things that we were incorporating into the design of the building had already been at least stabilized from the perspective of our scope. But we did certainly make some adjustments along the way, and we kept our infection control and all of the clinical folks very much involved as we learned lessons around the institution. But just to give an outline of what we are about to open, we have a new bed tower on our West Campus, and it's going to bring on 128 new med-surg beds, obviously all privates, 30 ICU, 8 ORs in total, and 8 procedure spaces. The procedure spaces cross over between the cardiology side in cath and EP and the interventional radiology side in IR and ICT. And then in addition, we have a real dearth of large, high quality conferencing spaces for our ACGME program. So on the West, we are bringing on board some new teaching spaces, and all of the support spaces related to that quaternary, tertiary quaternary level of care that is really highly concentrated on the West Campus for us. So the buildings, on the GFA side, around 345,000 square feet, 10 stories, plus a 11th story for teaching and a helipad. And we are thinking that we are going to get our C of O around October 10th, and we are targeting first patient on March 4th. So we are really in the throes of trying to get this building signed off and turned over, and then obviously the final equipment into the building. Susan, do you have anything to add?
No, I'll just add that, and actually, Teresa, you can go to the next slide. I think it's helpful to see. I'll just add that 2 of the floors that we really saw as expansions of the existing. So you have the surgery floor on level 5. That was basically growing and increasing the whole surgical platform on the West Campus as part of this project as well. But this axon, I think, we think is helpful for you to understand, everyone to understand the kind of interconnectivity between this building and back to the rest of the West Campus. And, I think, you can just go to the next slide, Teresa. But one of the things that, was a goal for this project was to create, better, more accessible private family spaces, as well as prioritizing staff spaces and places for staff respite. And, understanding lessons we learned from the pandemic about staff burnout, we really felt like some of these spaces could help to alleviate that going forward as we, as future healthcare emergencies emerge, unforeseen healthcare emergencies emerge. So this is that expanded 5th floor surgical platform that I was describing, which increased a large amount of family waiting space, as well as connects down to a new central sterile. So creating a brand new central sterile that will serve the new expanded ORs is another was another priority for the hospital to have the best for that type of cleaning. And we'll just close with the last slide. Dave, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else. This is our standard patient floor. This is specifically the med surge patient floor that has 32 beds per floor.
Yeah, and Susan, I was just going to add that, you know, because of the place that we were when the pandemic hit, as I said, a lot of our, I would say, structural and programmatic decisions were made. But it actually sort of dovetailed very well into what we learned, because we had made a commitment to keeping the family involved with care. Our inpatient rooms are large enough so that we have a staff zone, a patient zone, and a family zone. We also had provision space in the building for private family spaces for overnight sleep, take a break, take a shower, get folks out of the rooms, because we know that, especially on the ICUs, it's hard for the family to get rest. We had made a commitment early on to do 100% HEPA filtered air across the whole building, so that we had already built our air handlers and our fans so that we had the capacity to do that. And when obviously we all learned during the pandemic that telemetry and patient monitoring was essential as we expanded from a med surge level to an ICU level, and we had incorporated some of those enterprise systems into the building already. So, I mean, I know we all did it, but, you know, we turned our PACUs into ICUs. We turned, you know, our GI holding spaces into ICUs. And so we technologically geared this building so that it has the capacity to surge up. We also, I think everyone is experiencing staff burnout, and we tried to make it such that we had good break space for our clinical staff, our nursing staff. They have dedicated space. We also have the luxury of having a rooftop garden, healing garden space where people can, throughout the institution, can get outside, take a break, and not be really that far from work. So it's a special amenity that just happened to result from the geometry between the two buildings. We saw an opportunity and we took it. So we, like all of you, realize that it's really difficult to be in healthcare now, and the new inpatient building that we're about to bring on, it does set the tone for what BIDMC is going to try to do across the rest of the campus as we actually get a little bit of breathing room by opening the new building and having some spaces come available for us to revise and re-envision. And I think one of the last things that I wanted to say is that this also is highlighting our expanded and existing residency and medical student deficit of spaces in and throughout the campus. So we have spaces associated with the ACGME and the UME programs that are seem to always be the last thing, last need brought to the table. So we're looking at making sure that a matrix of our programming across every project that we do now is capturing the teaching side of the house as well, to make sure that these residents have overnight sleep rooms, medical students have special spaces so that they can actually touch down and not be looked over the shoulder by the residents or their chiefs. So all together, this new 400,000 square feet of space is giving us a littlest bit of breathing room. And it's also setting the tone for how we want to sort of re-envision some of the spaces that become available to the medical center as we move into the new building. So that's a really quick recap of where we stand today.
just ask one question, David? I can't tell from the rendering, but are there double head walls in the room? I know you're running it as a single, but do you have it set up for surgery?
No,
No.
John, we made a very robust head wall, and we decided to build them ourselves, prefabricated them ourselves,
Yeah.
so that, but we did not intend for two heads to be
Okay.
in the room.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll head on to the next project, Boston Children's Hospital Tower. Sue Ellen Donahue is the Director of Facility Planning for Children's, and Uma Ramanathan is the architect from Shepley.
Hey there, how are you all? So surprising how many similarities we have to the Beth Israel project that David was just speaking about. So we actually opened our doors, the new building, in June of this year. We got our C of O in January, so we had about a 6-month delta in between to try and get the building ready. So I wish my friends over at BI good luck with their 5-month timeline, but let us know if you need any tips on that. Similar programs, we had about 150 beds, heavy on the ICU.
Sorry to interrupt, but I have a few other slides if Teresa doesn't mind sharing, me sharing. I think it might help.
Yeah, I'm just having a little bit of trouble.
We have a lot of standard slides that we've used. Yeah, so very similar, 14
Uma, can you
stores,
share your slides?
Yep.
150 beds. We still have a lot of double beds. So again, as David was mentioning, now that the new building is open, we have embarked on another renovation project in the older part of our campus to undouble beds.
You're sharing.
I know I'm having a lot of problems with my Zoom right now, so
Okay. All right.
sorry. I think you guys are all looking at my screen.
Yeah.
All right. We can stay with this.
We can, I'll just talk through it. Very similar, 14 stories. We have roof gardens. We have interior gardens, much like David was talking about over at BI. We do have connections back to our main tower on levels 10, 6, 3, and some of our lower levels. So staff can get across one side of the campus to the other. Again, some of the considerations that we had early on in design were for flexibility of our spaces. So even before we knew COVID was going to hit, we had some ideas about wanting to be flexible, you know, being able to repurpose spaces if we needed to and redesign, and designing for equipment that hadn't been selected yet. That was a challenge in and of itself. You know, Uma, do you want to jump in with a couple of your points that we talked about yesterday in terms of the floor plan?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sue Ellen. One of the things that I'd like to highlight is the shape of the building was determined by the shape of the piece of land that was available, the site itself. And it really helped because it helped us actually apply 2 layers of onstage, offstage. So we had onstage, offstage. The left almost trapezoidal shape is purely patient care, and the square on the right is actually staff and family, and all the vertical transportation. So all of the family support spaces as well as the staff support spaces is actually off the unit. So staff actually are able to take the breaks that they need without it conflicting with any of the care that they're providing on the unit. So that's one level of on-stage, off-stage. And the other level of on-stage, off-stage is actually within the clinical space itself. On the left, where we had the, you know, very, very typical to everything that we do for the most part, where you have the outside corridor be the on-stage and the horizontal corridors be the off-stage. So there are actually 2 levels of on-stage, off-stage. And one of the things that actually children's as well as, you know, all the design team shares is the hand washing celebration stations. It just so happened that every floor has a hand washing station that, you know, it's to celebrate the whole aspect of hand washing, which was a big hit with, you know, with the COVID scene. And I think that was sort of it just happened that it, you know, we had pre-thought it, and it's a space that's right at the beginning of the unit, and the waiting area is actually outside the unit. One of the conscious decisions on this building was to make sure that all of the support spaces, when I say support, family as well as staff support spaces, should be off the, you know, the clinical part of the unit itself, because a lot of us who worked at BCH know that a lot of the support spaces in the older buildings were consumed by the clinical needs, because the clinical needs are so intense. So this, in this particular layout, it's not possible to take over family support and staff support spaces because they're clearly off the clinical side of the unit itself. Anything else, Sue Ellen?
So just in terms of what we changed during COVID, so when COVID hit, we were right in the midst of construction. And so everything paused for a little bit, and the construction team was able to figure out a way to spread their shifts out, set up hand washing stations, you know, check temperatures on the way in and all that. So we made it through that. It did slow down the project a little bit, but we figured out a way around it. The one thing that we did do during construction was convert one of the floors to be able to go all negative. And that was in a point in time where no one knew what to think about the pandemic and how to react to it. So this gave us a right to convert an entire floor of our building into negative pressure rooms, individually monitored, where prior to that, you know, we just had the regular, you know, 2 to 3 airborne infection isolation rooms that we typically have on a floor. The other interesting thing related to COVID was that when we changed our waiting rooms in our current surgical waiting area during COVID and added all the plexi barriers, it turns out that the staff really liked that. They went to an assigned seating scenario in the surgical waiting rooms where they tell the families to go sit in section A, B, C, or D, and they were groups of 2 to 3 chairs. And now they've added that back into our brand new waiting room. We didn't use plexiglass. We used some much nicer furniture dividers, but we were able to label them so that the physicians can go out and find the families really easily. And so this assigned seating thing is one of the takeaways from COVID that we hung on to. So time will tell if that keeps going, but that's the way we are proceeding right now. It seems to be working well.
Okay, thanks very much, Sue Ellen and Uma. Third up is Dartmouth Hitchcock, and we have David Duncan, Assistant Vice President for Facilities Management, and Jess Stebbins from HDR, the Architects.
Good morning, everyone. Just doing a voice check. Can you hear me okay?
Okay.
Good.
Great. And I'm fortunate enough to be literally sitting right next to Jessica, so she's here with me. But to set the stage, it's a 240,000 square foot, 5-story inpatient building. Next slide, please. The new tower sits on the north end of the campus, and you can see my existing 2 towers to the left and to the right. And we've created a new entrance in and out of this building from two different locations. And as we were planning or learning through the pandemic, we would be able in the future have patients come in one section of the building and leave in another section of the building. And if you also look to the left, how the new tower sits on the campus, because it is a component of our future pandemic planning, but our receiving area for the entire campus is just about in the middle of the entire campus's footprint, which is just shy of a half a mile walking through the corridors and going up the elevators to the new building. So next slide, please. So 5 stories can be 128 beds, designed all to be ICU private rooms. We're opening up 2 floors, so we're opening up 64 beds soon, and there's 32 beds per floor. But you can see there's like an east wing and a west wing, and the staff area is in like the south wing. So all of the clinical area is just 100% clinical space. The project was just finishing up DDs, and we were just starting construction when the pandemic hit full force. And the design team with the hospital pulled together very quickly as they were dealing with the pandemic. And here we were literally under construction of building a brand new inpatient unit. And there was several meetings that said, what have we learned real short term? And does our new building meet some of the things that we are faced with from the pandemic? And we learned that, yeah, the design had a lot of great features in it, but there was a couple things that we did quickly change. We did add operable windows to all the patient rooms, just so that we had an extra alternative way to get air in and out of the rooms. The HVAC system was all designed, equipment was on order, but we did make some engineering changes so that we were able to convert each wing to negative airflow on each floor, or the entire floor could be negative airflow, or an individual room is able to be negative airflow. So let me try to recap. 5-story building, 4 stories of inpatient ICU level rooms, and we were able to make some minor changes to the HVAC to make negative airflow, either by floor or by wing or by room. So that was a big win. What was already in the design, which became apparent to be important, is very similar to the 2 previous presentations. Respite rooms for the staff. Also, the rooms are large private rooms and are promoting family-focused care. So we're encouraging families to stay over, which will help with some of our staffing areas. They can be involved in some of the care, which then results with better care when the patients are home. But the building already had designed in it, which was terrific, amenities for the families to get away, be able to go take a shower, get a little bit of food, get some time away from, being with mom for 3 days in her room. The other things that we did modify as we were under the construction, and it had to do with telemetry. All the rooms were being set up to be ICU level care, ICU level monitors. We made sure that not only was it ICU level, but it was also telemetry capable, and that we had sections of the existing hospital that had the ability to do virtual care, where physicians could zoom into the room and be able to examine the patient virtually with the clinical people. So we modified and converted every room to have the ability to be virtual patient care. Again, so that any person or any clinical person across the country or across the world could literally zoom right into the room. And then the challenge of staffing became a big issue. And there was many meetings huddling about how we can operate this building, because it was designed in a manner that staffing was less of a concern. But again, many features came out that were already in the design. We had large supply rooms and storage rooms. And it was initially planned that, there'd be a delivery of supplies 2-3 times a week. And we analyzed the rooms were large enough to get deliveries of supplies at least once a week, or we'd be able to handle all the volume with 1-a-week deliveries. The long distance from our shipping area we've instituted and added technology, and we're going to have robots delivering supplies and pharmacy supplies from the support service areas of the campus all the way up into this building. And the robots are going to be able to go through the elevators and know which floor that they need to get off on. Large ledge areas to clean. We're embarking on new robotic floor cleaning equipment so that one housekeeper could manage two automated floor floor cleaning piece of equipment. So again, trying to analyze, we're going to have not the ideal staff that we want to run this place, and how are we going to be able to maintain that. I think that's pretty much an overview. Jessica, do you have anything you want to add?
If you go back one slide, Teresa, the next two slides, this one and the one that
We can't hear Jessica.
She can't hear you. Here you go.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Some technical issues. So I think just the delineation between, very similar to the Boston Children's Project, is separating the clinical zone from the staff zone. And in the core where we have the staff offices, their amenities such as a staff lounge, respite areas, and it also provides them a secure space, so that allows them to get off the floor as well. I think I'm going to wrap it up there because I'm having some difficult time hearing. But Teresa, those two slides, the previous slide and the typical room layout, please send that out just as additional information to the team.
Yeah, we'll be sending out this presentation.
And again, just one question I have is are there two head walls or just one head wall?
Very similar to David at BI, very, very robust head wall, but it wasn't designed for two rooms.
Two heads. Okay. All right. Thanks, Dave and Jess. Moving on to the MGH new inpatient tower, which is in planning, starting construction. We have Susan Cronin-Jenkins, who's the Director of Planning and Construction at MGH, and Sarah Markovitz from NBBJ, the architects.
Okay, well, I'll start and then Susan, you kick in. Just to give a broad overview of this project, it's a roughly 1 million square feet project, 450 patient rooms, about 30 ORs, almost all the support facilities, 2 floors of all cancer ambulatory care, all infusion and exam for the cancer center. And we were just completing schematic design when COVID hit. So we're just going to focus on what the COVID impact was. Next slide. Right, Susan, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. So during COVID, we actually had recently built the Lunder building, and very similar situations that everyone else had. Our OR procedure areas were shut down. We redeployed staff. So we would have a capacity meeting every day during this crisis to see where could we surge to. So we, like other people, we surged to general care to become ICU in the Lunder building. We surged into all our peri-operative PACU bays for added capacity. And every day we would try to just keep seeing what's the next unit that we need to, provide ICU level of care and then redeploy staff. So during the design of this, we actually had a collaborative multidisciplinary COVID lesson learned brainstorming session with all our leaders. And what we did is basically, this is a acute room, a typical med surg room. Its everyday situation would be a single patient room. But we also did meet the FGI and DPH guidelines that if we had a surge to double occupancy in our med surg floors in this new building, we were able to accommodate that in the circulation around the patient areas. As well as these can also have the infrastructure from the head walls, the monitoring and everything else to surge into an ICU bed level of care. So this is something that we really thought about during Lunder, but then truly went through the due diligence in the CSP design.
Yep. So next slide, please, Teresa. And then we were also trying to increase, as many of you talked about, the number of negative pressure rooms we had in the building. So on the ICU, we have one ICU floor with 2 sides, each of 32 bed units. And so we've designed the ICU rooms so that each one can also be made into a negative pressure room with the inclusion of an anteroom. So the rooms are designed so that we can put in a temporary stark wall to make an anteroom. And there's basically a stub wall up above where that temporary wall would be, so that we can really enclose the room and make them really a fully negative pressure room with an anteroom. Next. Oops, the slide didn't come over right, but that's okay. What this is talking about is just the number of AII rooms and PE rooms that we had originally planned pre-COVID for the building. And then the next slide too, I'm sure the graphic's not going to come up right. Yeah, well, oh well. But we determined that we would, aside from the ICU floor, 3 other inpatient units, med-surg units, are designed so each room can become negative pressure by turning on either a wing or the whole floor to really increase the negative pressure capacity in the overall building. So in the end, we will have 114 rooms available on this part of the campus that can go to negative pressure. Next, maybe, yeah. So just a couple other things that we're thinking about in terms of COVID, aside from surge capacity. So I guess I could have said this previously. So aside from all these rooms that can go negative, we are planning the PACU rooms are designed so that they can be used as ICU rooms. We have a short stay observation unit in the cancer center that can also be used as surge capacity. So clearly that was a big lesson learned from COVID, was just surge capacity in general. And then I think we had talked about, I think one other big impact was just, we all know about PPE now, and our standard design had been to have a PPE room outside of every patient room. But with COVID, we've now made these built-in PPE cabinets. These are photos from a mock-up that we just completed so these aren't the finished materials, but we were testing out the best way to make these PPE cabinets. They sit also between every peri-op bay, every 2 peri-op bay, between every 2 exam rooms and between every 2 infusion bays. So just the ability to have PPE close by is definitely a reaction to COVID. And then I guess, now let's skip this. I mean, we did think about pathways, about how the building can be used in the future to separate out pathways in a future pandemic for staff, people who actually have an airborne infection. Those are presumed to have an infection and those who don't. And so we've gone through that exercise as well. But if we can go back to the patient room, up. Thanks, Teresa, one more up. Just a couple other things that are thought about in terms of technology in the room. So we had not yet selected this at the Andis SD. So we are looking at smart TVs for each room, but we are much more cognizant about the kind of features we want so that we can do remote consults with physicians who are not in the space, or with bringing family members in to be able to maintain contact in some future pandemic, and maybe some thoughts about infection prevention and whether we can routinely have remote consults, not to have as many people in any patient room at any one time. We're also putting digital signage outside of every room that can have precautions. And also outside of the ICU rooms, we're going to have a digital, we're putting in the utilities so that we can have remote monitoring of the patient. So somebody can see the physiological monitor for the patient outside the room without having to enter the room at some other future pandemic time. Susan, is there anything else you wanted to?
Well, I think to that point, with the limited PPE and trying to limit people going in to do a history and physical on the patient. So really trying to say, what do we need to do from technology to allow people to remain outside the room, but actually, have the benefit of seeing what's happening during them HMP and assessment of the patient. So really trying to think about that, and love to hear what some of the other hospitals are doing that are further advanced than us for the, virtual visits, interpretive services, sitters, all those type of things, because we're investigating that now, and would love to see it in action once you go live before us. Because we're not going live until 2027 for the first tower, and then 2030. So I'm sure the technology will change, but it'd be great to hear what other people are doing and thinking about, and the successes of that.
Okay, thanks, Susan. I think, and thanks, Sarah. I think that's a question we can come back to when we get into the Q&A, is what folks are doing for, if anything, for remote monitoring. Okay, our last and fifth project is the Newton Wellesley bed conversion, so it's community hospital view of the world. And to discuss it today, we have Justin Ferbert, who's the Director of Facilities Engineering and Maintenance at Newton Wellesley, and Ron Gorham from Perkins & Will, the architect.
Okay. Go ahead, Justin.
I'll let you kick it off, and then I'll chime in, Ron. Okay.
Sure. So like a lot of the facilities in Massachusetts, you have your bulk of community hospitals, and there's a lot of renovations and fit outs that go within. And how do you, accommodate for COVID when you're working with fixed infrastructures and concerned with supply chain and concerned with waves of COVID and influenza coming up at any moment. So what we did do is we spoke with the users. We incorporated some COVID lessons, and also working with the hospital, knowing that this particular project is important to be quick for the next wave of COVID or influenza. So speed to market was also a key opportunity. What you'll see on the next slide is that we kind of boiled it down to 5 major points of incorporation. And of those 5, we did talk about flexibility, visibility, communication amongst staff, both with technology and physical presence. That was important. Staff experience was also a key factor here. Shortage of staffing throughout the Commonwealth, nursing, and particularly at different shifts, and being able to provide a space that was, had access to daylight and comfortable and even secluded in some ways, so that they can just go and decompress was also an important factor. And then as we start construction, the efficiency factor. How can we do this and minimize the number of crews on site to disrupt the floors above and below us. This is directly above an emergency department, live and active, and it's directly below an active oncology unit. So we have a lot of patient sensitivities around us. So we want to be able to make use of strategies such as prefabrication, both on the utility side and even the component side, such as head walls and furnishings. So those are some of the things that we did. From a flexibility point of view, in comparison to the other units within the hospital, we did increase the number of airborne isolation rooms, but we also thought about diversity of patients. So we also have an airborne isolation room that can accommodate bariatric patients. All the patient rooms themselves are equipped with patient lifts, but we felt that was an important factor as well. I would also say that from a ventilation point of view, we are able to switch over the floor and become negative pressure, particularly for the patient rooms. The green area is that of the public zone, and it is secured off with doors, and that'll allow us to help maintain pressurizations of the unit, but also separate public if needed during the times of COVID. We did provide additional infrastructure such as gases, power, and ventilation to accommodate that. But for double-bedded rooms, you can see the larger rooms at the top of the plan. The structure did allow for larger rooms, so we did provide additional provisions should we need to add an additional head in those particular rooms. One of the items I mentioned about communication, There is a centralized staffing pod, if you will. This is where they can have collaboration and documentation that occurs in the unit. This is a departure from where they were on previous units, where they actually had the collaboration station spread out. But when you think about a shortage of staffing, or even on the second and third shifts, we have less staff, it was important that they were able to congregate in a particular zone and area. We still maintain perimeter observation bays or pods between each of the patient rooms so that they can see within, and visibility to the patients is very key, but providing some means of privacy with it will be accommodated for. The other key component amongst the doors and the observation bays along the perimeter of the patient rooms, it allows for daylight to come into the core itself. And that's something that was also important to the staff because they may not have that today. And a lot of the older units within community hospitals don't have that. So this is really where the devil's in the detail of a lot of the things that we are doing. Technology within the patient rooms, we are providing a patient information wall, if you will, that includes a flat screen monitor. Maybe there'll be a whiteboard there as well, but the flat screen monitor will allow for, in the future, future collaboration with outside consultants, doctors, virtual meetings, maybe even patient family members calling in to a patient, as well as entertainment. So, Justin, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Just, I wanted to highlight the fact that the floor above is an orthopedic recovery floor. It's laid out very similarly to this, but we made some, some decisions based on lessons learned. That floor during COVID was turned into a negative floor. We had the capability of doing that, thankfully. And it was all ICU level care. Those rooms that were built out, 10 plus years ago, were fitted with double head walls, and it allowed us to add an additional 10 beds to that floor, which are still in use today. So the idea there was to take the lessons learned from that COVID surge from the nursing staff and the physicians that operated out of that floor, and bring their feedback to the design of this space, which is directly beneath. It's an open shell space, which is obviously a rarity in these days to have an open 24,000 square feet of space in any building. So it's our opportunity here to add bed capacity to the system and take those lessons learned and really make a purposely designed space that serves our patients now and in the future.
Great. Thank you very much, Ron and Justin. So a lot of information here, a lot of similarities, but also some differences, and projects obviously in different phases of design, development, and implementation. So I think there are plenty of things we could talk about, but since technology in the patient room has been raised a couple of times, and it is an emerging field, and I think an increasingly important part of what we're trying to understand is both the remote monitoring capability. I remember, and you all may have seen some photographs of in hospitals where they had actually put the equipment outside the patient room and punched a hole in the wall and run cables through. I think anybody who's had experience with that would be interested to hear how it worked and how it didn't work. I've certainly heard that cable length is an issue, but also just the need to actually touch the patient. So it's not, you may be reducing the number of people going into the room, but you still have to lay hands on the patient. But I think the emerging technology, and there's certainly a lot of salespeople calling me, I don't know about anybody else, about all the new ways that they have to put technology in the room and essentially leave just about everybody else out of the room. I think it remains to be seen, and I want to be part of the crowd, but I don't want to be leading the crowd when it comes to that kind of major investment and commitment to depending much more on technology to monitor patient and for also family communication. So why don't we, it looks like we have about a little more than 5 minutes. Actually, before we get into that, Teresa, are there any pressing questions in the chat that folks may have that we should jump to first?
I have technical difficulties. I can't see the
Okay.
chat.
All right. All right. Well, I can't see it either. So
Rani was keeping track for me. So I don't know, Rani, if there's any.
There's no chats.
There's
No
no
chats?
questions.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about technology. So, Dave Duncan mentioned up at Dartmouth, they're implementing some technology, and there's a couple of quick stories he could tell about testing different cameras and trying to get something on the wall to focus on a patient in the bed. I think the remote monitoring, which is something that's been discussed, and I think we're going to see more and more of that as time goes on. So I'm not going to pick anybody, but if somebody would like to start that conversation and see where it goes for a few minutes. Dave, why don't you talk about what the experimentation you did with cameras?
Yeah, everybody wants a view into the room, but we didn't want to have 3 or 4 cameras. So our IT team and clinical engineering team worked very hard with the virtual visit camera, which was the most high-end camera. It's like an EICU type camera. And we were able to incorporate our telesitting monitoring to go through that camera. And then also we have a centralized telemetry monitoring. So not only do we have ICU level monitoring, but we have a central command center that monitors all of Dartmouth Hitchcock systems patients. And we were able to incorporate that telemetry monitoring camera to our central station using that existing camera. So we have 3, maybe 4 different uses going through one camera. So, but there was a lot of work done with that, John. I made that sound really simple.
And just to add on to that, David and John, we also spent a lot of time looking at providing digital patient information outside of the patient room so we could display precautions, or the clinical team could go and see information about the patient before entering into the room. We've provided the infrastructure. We're still looking at different technology, the type of monitor that's still in the work, but Dartmouth has been very good about being very forward thinking and providing the infrastructure so it's easy to add technology as things evolve.
Great, thanks. So Susan from MGH mentioned that, the interest in remote monitoring from the corridor. Has anybody actually implemented that on an ongoing basis at their hospitals, and is that reflected the ability to look into the patient room? And obviously there's a whole privacy concern, but look into the patient room, and the monitoring equipment is organized in such a way that they can do a view of the data without actually having to enter the room.
So John, so similar to other areas, we have central CIC, central stations that can view all the patients with all the hemodynamics and all their monitoring at central stations. And then we have ADUs that display the critical alarms. I think what happened is, instead of running the cables like some places did and having the monitor outside, we were going to put a secondary monitor out there. We have large glass windows, so you can actually see into the patient room. And actually we have remote where people can actually adjust the alarms from the corridor. But just a conduit so that if they wanted to add that outside, we could do it. And a lot of it was the respiratory team for the ventilator, so they wouldn't have to go in to make the adjustment. So, I think the central stations is probably more prominent that we're going to be keeping with, because that's what we do now. But
yeah,
just looking at options for the future.
Hi. Sorry.
Yeah.
This is Marvina. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey,
Okay. Hey, I'm sorry. I'm with Perkinson Will, and we did at UVA put telemedicine monitors in all the rooms, enabling them to do video conferencing with the specialist or other staff members. And then all the staff had a handheld computer that they could talk with the patient, monitor them. They, especially when, you know, with COVID, they didn't have to go into the room as much. That helped protect them quite a bit. And then they felt like it was just good for all around patient care because they could, you know, go into, you know, several different areas and still be able to pull up their patients and see what was going on with them. So it was a real plus. And I'm trying to remember, I was trying to look it up, the name of that program that they're using. So if I can find it, I can let you know and put it in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great, Marlena. Thank you.
I'll quickly add that at Beth Israel, approximately every 4 rooms, we have the central monitors up above, high up above on the soffit of the wall in the corridors. So wherever you are in that unit, you can see that the unit's kind of split into 2 halves. And you can see all those 16 rooms of that half from pretty much anywhere as you're walking along the corridor. You can get a snapshot of the central monitors of all those rooms. So, as well as being able to look directly into the rooms and position, you know, through room side charting, positioning the monitors so you could see them through the windows themselves. But that was the other layer, was adding the Philips monitors high above, really all down the inpatient corridor.
Yeah, I got a feeling that we are, you know, I mean, it's already happening and we're going to see more of that type of technology. I mean, there's obviously privacy and other kinds of concerns associated with it, but I kind of think once we figure out how to deal with that privacy concern, that we're going to be seeing a lot more, not clinical equipment monitoring, but just monitoring of the patient and for communications. I did see a question come into the chat about have any of the projects increased the size of the clean storage rooms on the floors? The answer is no.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think
we're going to a more of a centralized system across BILH. We're building 150,000 square foot facilities to sort of manage all 14 of the hospitals. So I think that's kind of our solution to not having enough. John, can I pivot for a second?
Sure. So long as it's not about golf, right?
Yeah, the conversation around being able to take your floors from normally positive pressure to negative pressure. Are people writing SOPs for rebalancing the spaces around these floors or units so that you can demonstrate that you have appropriate stair pressurization and other things for during commission?
Yeah,
I'm
you know,
a little soft on that one. How does that work on the
yeah,
perimeter?
I'm not going to answer you, partly because I think we're just about out of time, but I think there's a whole session we can have on this positive negative pressure issue, and we're seeing clinicians that are asking for negative pressure in ORs, negative pressure in various different places, and it's really going against a lot of FGI guidelines and some other practices. And I think as the folks who are operating the facilities and also designing them, I think there's no problem designing negative pressure, although it's, you know, there's a sophistication to that. But as you mentioned, Dave, you know, being able to balance the spaces around that negative pressure space, you know, keeping them positive when they need to be positive. I think there's a whole discussion we should have there, and the way, where is this going, and what do the current codes and standards allow us to do, and perhaps what's being discussed in some of these working groups at the code level to address these kinds of things. So I think, you know, going back to Teresa and Richard and the team, I think we can probably pull together 2 or 3 engineers and facilities operations folks and get a a session around positive negative pressure and all the challenges associated with that.